Ilia Topuria, former featherweight champion, current lightweight champion, with a recent 3-fight resume of Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and from last Saturday, Charles Oliveira. And not only did he just fight and beat these last 3 guys, he knocked them all out within the first 3 rounds. I mean, just based on these 3 fights alone, people are saying he could beat guys like Islam, he could easily take care of Paddy, or even punch up and take out guys like Jack Della. It is very safe to say that this guy, El Matador, has an incredible hype train surrounding him. One hype train that I do find myself on as well, or maybe was, based on the title you just read. Trust me, going into making this video and starting my initial research and data collection, I wanted to be proven right, be proven that Ilia is in fact the real deal. But after collecting this data and analyzing it, I'm not so sure anymore. I need y'all to hear me out on this one. Ladies and gentlemen, today we beg the question. Joining the UFC back in late 2020, Ilia Topuria has had 9 fights in the UFC. 7 of those ending by way of finish, 6 of them being by knockout. Now for reference, if we look at a few other pretty notable names, Max Holloway, Islam, Khabib, each have had 4 of their first 9 ending by finish. Gaethje has had 5 of his first 9 ending by finish. And Dricus, Alex Pereira, John Jones, and Conor McGregor all have had 6 of their first 9 UFC fights ending by finish. While I didn't spend too much time on this segment, the only other guy that I found so far that has matched this stat and has beaten Ilia is Tom Aspinall with 8 of 9 finishes. But, I mean, come on now, that's heavyweight. We'd expect him to get more finishes. Just based on this statistic alone, Ilia joins and rises above some pretty elite company, I will say. So this is the first area I wanted to investigate for Ilia. His striking clearly is something special. To how often he's getting these knockouts, to his timing, to his power, there's gotta be something here, right? Just to begin, if we look at Ilia's basic striking stats compared to all other featherweights and lightweights that are listed on UFCstats.com, Ilia's current basic striking stats are currently 4.81, 48% striking accuracy, 3.83 strikes absorbed per minute, and 64% striking defense. Overall, I would say very good numbers, and compared to all other feather and lightweights listed on UFC stats, this fact does in fact hold true. Of course, there are only guys with maybe 1 or 2 bouts in the UFC, so that's where you get numbers like 12 strikes landed per minute, but overall he is definitely above the average of at least among the feather and lightweights. Well, okay, this is great, and again, so far, I feel this proves my initial goal of proving statistically Ilia Topuria is in fact the real deal. This is cool and all, but what if we shrink it down even more? What if we only include the current list of UFC champions around Ilia's weight, potential foes of Ilia, as well as past champions to see where Ilia lies? I did not want to include people like John Jones, Aspinall, or Magomed on this section of the graphs by fear of skewing the averages on graphs, but even with this is where things begin to take a turn. Here are the fighters I will be comparing Ilia to, and here are the graphs with each of these fighters' striking statistics. Looking at these graphs, Ilia, it appears, is only about average in all of these different striking metrics. The only exception being significant strike defense, where he only ranks below Georges St-Pierre. Not bad company or result at all if we were only saying Ilia is an elite counter-striker, which by just watching him is technically true. It would seem most of his knockouts do come from exchanges within the pocket. Ilia puts on pressure, he baits strikes, knowing he's in full control of an exchange. However, this still doesn't necessarily explain the whole story, as we're looking at to prove how dominant he is in all of these striking stats, and it definitely does not explain where all of his power is coming from too. My first look into making more sense of things was looking at the first 9 fights of these fighters. Maybe Ilia is not as dominant statistically because, well, he only has 9 recorded fights within the UFC. It would be much more fair to look at the first 9 fights for these other fighters as well. However, looking at these fighters' first 9 fights in the UFC, we could see Ilia's once again smack dab in the middle. And it is interesting, Ilia is such a technical striker, which I guess would explain why he's directly in the middle, but still, one burning question that I've had this entire time is where does all of Ilia's power come from? And where my results have led me, I think I may have an answer that potentially fraud checks Ilia as well as other current UFC champions. Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and Charles Oliveira. What do these 3 guys have in common? Not only were they opponents of Ilia, but they have a combined average age of 34 years old. Holloway still only at 33, Charles Oliveira being at 35, and Volkanovski is 36. Now, let's look at another fighter real quick. Jon Jones. Jon Jones's average age of all of his opponents in championship fights is 33.24. Do you know what I'm trying to get at now? Also, yes, for this next segment, all the ages were hand calculated. I had to go through every single age of the fighters when they fought and everything, so just putting that in there because I know there's going to be some confusion. In case you don't, it's absolutely no secret as fighters get older, they lose a bit of a step. Their metabolism slows, they lose explosiveness and fatigue setting in more quickly, as well as becoming way more susceptible to knockouts the older they get. Again, this is no secret whether you Google search it or try to find a research paper to back it up. The general consensus has always been a fighter has till about 34 to 35 years old before they do lose this edge and are more likely to be knocked out. Jon Jones is often criticized for this fact in his rise through the UFC as well as his title fights. However, not only does Ilia have a higher average age of opponent in title fights, but if we look at Jon Jones's first 9 fights in the UFC and compare his opponent's average age to Ilia's 9 fights, we can see Ilia is still higher. Well, okay, but how does this rank up against our other fighters from earlier? This time with the inclusion of people like Khabib and who many claim only fought old people, as well as Dricus. Looking at this graph, we can see Ilia's 32.3 is still the 3rd highest, as well as when we move to the average age of opponents in title fights, we could see Ilia's once again the 3rd highest. And if we look at who Ilia is underneath, there are 2 names, Islam and Dricus du Plessis. And what is it that Ilia, Islam, and Dricus all have in common? They're all current champions who have finished legends of the sport. But isn't it weird that they make up the highest average age of opponents in title fights? Again, Jon Jones, many criticized for having an easier time defending and fighting for his belt, all because of the age of his opponents. So this begins my new thought. While I can't deny Ilia is super technical, and the data does in fact back this up, saying his defense is top tier, however, I think there needs to be a conversation, not just for Ilia, but for other fighters like Islam and Dricus about being at the right time and right place to get these title wins and finishes that are made to look just absolutely easy. Of course, I'm not taking anything away from these guys. Ilia still knocked out Volk, he still knocked out Holloway, he still knocked out Charles, as well as all 3 of these guys are still very early into their title reigns. Anything could change. However, I just think it's interesting that we create these crazy hype trains for guys like Ilia knocking out Volk when maybe it was expected with Volk's prime coming to an end. I think Ilia and Islam is still a super fight. That is something I want to see, but what do you guys think about all these numbered statistics? I guess I'm not leaving off any definitive answers. Anything could change, and I'm still a big fan of Ilia and Islam, but maybe this video helps open discussion for talks about age in fighting and what is that age you truly do see a decline at. Of course, this is all just speculation, and you could hypothetically look at it the other way around, saying, Ilia's beating guys who are way more experienced than him and should be beating him because of that experience. And again, one more time, I'm still a super big fan of Ilia, and I'm really looking forward to what he can accomplish in this sport. And again, he's only 3 fights in this title reign. Anything could change. He could get knocked out in his next fight. You never know. But thank you, everyone. I hope this video opens up discussion. I would really like that. I hope you enjoyed this return video. Make sure to like and subscribe. And yeah, I guess until next time, peace.